Hello, I'm Carwyn Jones, and welcome to this series of podcasts where I interview the movers and shakers in the Welsh business community. I'm very glad today to be joined by Siwan Rees, who is the Entrepreneurship Development Manager at NatWest. Siwan, croeso mawr.
Diolch yn fawr, croeso.
And you're very welcome today on this podcast.
Thank you.
Now, lots of people want to know more about you, and we like to ask people what their journey is as they arrive at where they are now. You went to Ysgol Gyfun Gwynllyw.
I did indeed.
Which at that time was the only Welsh medium comprehensive school in the Old Gwent, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah. So Ysgol Gyfun Gwynllyw. I came from a little village in Pengam. So my sort of junior school, if you like, education was in a little village where we were actually very close to the border. So I could see my fellow friends, if you like, go for a 10-minute bus journey to Cwmrymni, whereas I was the wrong side of the river and ended up having to travel nearly about an hour and a half really to school every day. But it was very much worth it. A fantastic education at Gwynllyw, yeah, and one I'm very proud of.
You did French and Spanish amongst
yes, I did. 4
A-levels that you studied. When you left Gwynllyw, you went to Swansea to study
I did indeed.
European business and French.
I did, yeah. So I took actually a gap year, which wasn't planned for many reasons. Originally I did actually go to Aston University in Birmingham, but decided that the life in a city, if you like, didn't actually suit me, coming from quite a small rural community. And in any case, I sort of took a year to have a quick look around industry, and in fact decided to work in banking for a year, which gave me quite a good foundation effectively to understand a little bit more about what I wanted to study. Yeah, so I went to the business school at Swansea and studied European Business Management and French, where I was again very privileged to take a year out and study in Le Havre in a business school.
École de Management de Normandie.
Yeah.
Don't criticise my pronunciation. But there you are. So obviously a very strong working knowledge of French in a business context.
Absolutely.
And having studied, you then went on to join Hayes.
I did, yeah. And it was upon, I think, my final exam, I got an email into my student inbox, which effectively was asking for Welsh speakers of all things. There was a very commercial, I suppose, leader at the helm in Hayes in Wales at the time, who'd identified a great opportunity for Welsh speakers and Welsh-speaking job vacancies. But again, needed a Welsh speaker in order to be able to lead that in the business ecosystem, from both a candidate perspective and from a business perspective. So my role was to establish Gwasanaeth Cymraeg Hayes, which became a sort of a really good, if you like, partner to a lot of public sector organisations and other organisations willing, if you like, to adopt the Welsh language as part of their people strategy. So we were that support, which is something I was really proud of, actually being able to, if you like, have an impact on not only sort of putting Welsh at work, if you like, but also in providing the business community with that opportunity to look at how infusing Welsh within the business environment can actually add so much value.
You spent 3 years at Hayes, and then you went on to Proxima, where you were the head of recruitment UK, US and Europe.
That's right.
Very impressive. Tell us a bit about that job.
What a job, yeah. And actually it was, again, my Welsh language that got me into that role, funnily enough. The CEO currently of the organisation was a gentleman from Pontardawe, actually. And the way it happened was they were a client of mine at Hayes. And this is a complete and open sort of story. Everybody knows this one. And I sort of managed to recruit successfully for their shared service that they brought from London to Cwmbran. And it was almost a conversation to say, okay, right, if you fill these amount of jobs for us at Hayes, why don't you come and have a look at how we can, I suppose, develop your career internally? And that's when I made the move to go and work for them. And as a BPO, if you like, or a procurement outsource business, I got a chance to work on a multitude of clients, from British Airways to Universal Music to Morrison's to sort of BG Group, which is sort of the commercial arm of British Gas as it was, and many others. And the span of the company, of course, was global. So we had an operation in London, which meant I got to travel to London quite a bit, which was a fantastic experience. There was also an operation at Universal in Paris at the time. There was an operation in Santa Monica, of course, the home of Universal Music. And after a few years, I also got the opportunity to look at how I could replicate what we'd built in Cwmbran in Chicago. So again, obviously that took us to another point in the US. So absolutely, what an incredible job. And one that the experiences I don't think I'd be able to replicate again. So for example, recruiting for Universal, I took a reference from somebody who'd previously worked on a film with Elvis, for example. It was incredible. Some of the things that sort of you get to witness was unreal.
You seem to have loved that job.
Absolutely.
You spent more than 4 years in it.
Yes.
But then you moved on to USW. What was the reason for that?
Well, I'd do sort of myself disjustice if I didn't mention children at this point. So I've got 2 children. I've got a daughter 9, Cariad, and a son 5, and Griff. And at the time, I obviously was working at Proxima in London. I'd been on maternity leave for the second time, and I think it's sort of, I suppose, an epiphany that every working mother goes through in terms of sort of trying to set that self-worth piece. Okay, how can I pivot my skill set? What can I look at now? And I've always had a passion for talent. At Proxima, I was very privileged to set up an academy. So I was sort of helping to grow our own talent learning and development and looking at the acquisition piece. And I think USW sort of almost brought me closer, if you like, to the skills machine. I was able to influence a little bit about what industry wanted in terms of the skill sets that they needed to produce. And again, I think in a different way, that role gave me an opportunity to start to sort of shape opportunities for students. So my connections that I'd gained in the procurement world, for example, we were able to put placement students into those companies in Wales. And it was just about sort of, I suppose, transferring my knowledge of industry into academia, which again, obviously, was a great privilege.
I just want to take your view on something there.
Yeah.
I've had young women say to me that they have been reluctant, almost afraid to have children because they're ambitious.
Yeah.
And, fine, of course. And they feel that their careers might be harmed if they take time off, which no man would ever consider as a problem.
Absolutely.
But clearly it is something that's still there even now in this day and age. You've managed that, and it doesn't seem to have acted as a break of any kind on your career.
No.
What message would you have for those women?
I think my message would definitely be one of courage. Dare I say that actually behind your family is an individual, and I think you have still got that very much the ability and the right, if you like, to really see through your career aspirations. I invested heavily in my career when I was in university. I put myself forward for the opportunities. I sort of, in France, for example, I sort of partnered with a small business entrepreneur who wanted us to work on a research project which was live and current. And he obviously was setting up a business off the back of our research. So I think it's the passion that I had for business, which I kind of wanted to see through myself. I've got to be honest, however, I've been incredibly supported. So I've got a phenomenal network behind me. So in terms of the support that I've received at home, to be able to do that, again, I think that is something that I suppose my career couldn't have been what it is without the support at home.
Can I ask you this question? Have you found it's not easy to juggle work and kids and all myself.
No.
Have you found that having children has in any way affected your career path?
I think it makes you more driven, if I'm honest. At the end of the day, you are a role model to 2 children. And from what I've obviously witnessed through the academic system, it's tough, and it's tougher than when I was going through that sort of same process myself. Competition, aspiration, demand, pressure, the whole sort of suite of challenges are there, and they're real. So I think in terms of my own sort of aspiration for my own children, I'm almost role modelling out what I want them to do. And it hasn't hindered me whatsoever. In fact, it makes you absolutely more driven. So from that perspective, I don't think it is a challenge. It's a challenge if you let it to be, but I think we're starting to talk a lot more about this as a society, about sort of how we can empower women in terms of thinking differently about having those bits and bobs to juggle, you know.
I think it's really important to hear that from you so that others will hear today. And what you said is, you've got your career path, as anybody would want, and also you've got your family.
Yeah.
And it is possible.
It is possible.
To do both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I think, obviously, my family would concur that some of the opportunities that they've had as a result of things that I've sort of experienced and taken home, and the stories and sort of the opportunities, has enriched what they've seen, you know. So I think it's about being very sort of, I suppose, balanced about it. Yes, it's a juggling act. Yes, there are some times where I forget to do things because obviously work has called, or I've gone on obviously with a very fixed mindset in the morning with something on my mind to get to sort of delivered. But I think they are very few and far between. And
it's not a choice of career or family.
It's not a choice.
That's the important message.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. I think they go hand in hand.
Good. Well, I didn't take any paternity leave when my kids came along. It just wasn't done in those days. I was just straight back in work pretty quickly. And in terms of being a role model, I can tell you that neither of my kids would ever want to be in politics, having seen the effect it can have. Okay, so you go into HE, you're there, you're director of the USW Exchange.
Yes.
Then you go to be Director of Business Development at Cardiff and Vale College.
Cardiff and Vale College.
And now you are the Entrepreneurship Development Manager at NatWest. Tell us a bit about that role.
This quite possibly is, you talked about sort of being driven and sort of seeing people with courage. Well, it's in abundance at the NatWest Accelerator Programme in Cardiff. So NatWest actually have supported entrepreneurs for a number of years across the UK. The hub in Cardiff actually was established in 2016. However, it was under the guise of eSpark, but obviously we took that into the bank in 2018. And since 2018, we've supported around 300 entrepreneurs to help them start, scale and succeed effectively. So from my perspective, my role there is to help them to unlock the networks that exist in the ecosystem in Wales. So say, for example, if you've got a business and you know that there's opportunity potentially to grow that organisation or that business, my role is to help you to do that through the various connections that we've got and the supply chain of contacts that we've got across the bank.
So give me an idea. I come in, I'm a new startup.
Yeah.
What can you offer me in terms of services?
So there are three main, I suppose, pillars to our proposition. So number one, again, as I just said, is the network. So it's about us being able to introduce you to a plethora of mentors, potentially, with knowledge that they really want to give back in terms of what they've previously experienced or previously done. We are very, we're very heavily supported by a suite of partners. So you've got the likes of Dell, Hiscox, Free Agent, Business Wales, Pinsent Masons, and also Equifax, who are there as a, if you like, a sort of a surrounding core of support around your operation, which you can call upon any day, basically, to give you sort of a varying advice around any sort of those operational issues. And also we've got, again, like I said, across the sort of the footprint of Wales, our supply chain of contacts across NatWest and the group are profound. We've got a huge sort of appetite in order to be able to connect those customers together, to talk about opportunity and to talk about excellence and how they can help them to sort of start, scale, or help you in your instance to start and to scale that business. The second pillar, if you like, is all around coaching. So each entrepreneur on the Accelerator programme gets 60 minutes of executive business coaching per month. And that is an opportunity for you as a business leader to share your challenges, get the monkey, if you like, off your back, talk about your issues, and for the coach to hold you accountable. And we know that entrepreneurship is a very lonely place. So if you're a business leader, no doubt you're the decision maker, you're the finance team, you're the marketing suite, you're everything else as well. But obviously the Accelerator programme, we give the opportunity for people to almost come together in order to share that burden, if you like, through that journey.
And it's after the first year, isn't it, sometimes when people feel it most, because the enthusiasm of setting up a business is there to begin with.
Absolutely.
And a year on, when things perhaps are not going well, things are not developing as quickly as they might, that's the time when people, I think, need more support.
Exactly. And I think it's sometimes, without knowing the ecosystem, it's sometimes a very difficult place to navigate. So I think one of the key passions that we try to infuse into our entrepreneurs is the absolute ability to navigate that ecosystem. Tell us what you need. What are the 5 barriers to scale? So we know funding's one. We know talent and skills is another, which again, obviously, is my sweet spot in terms of wanting to connect academia, for example, with these businesses. Where are the work placement students?
Which is what you were doing in USW, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the third sort of pillar of our proposition in NatWest is all about the community. There's so much power behind putting an entrepreneur next to another that potentially has been through a different journey or has experienced other challenges that they can share.
Do you ever come across businesses whose ideas are so obviously going to fail that you have to tell them?
Absolutely. It would be, I think, disjustice for us not to, obviously we are never able to advise, and of course obviously there is that element of trusting an individual struggle, but I think there are sort of ways and means that we can expose them to conversations not necessarily delivered by us even, but to networking events or knowledge sharing or sort of fireside chats, which leads them to that conclusion that actually something isn't quite right here. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen some strange things over the years and wondered why somebody would have that idea. But then sometimes these things work. At the moment, what's your view in terms of the numbers of people coming forward to you? Do you think there are still... one of the issues we've had in Wales is that people are reluctant to go into business.
Absolutely.
And when they do and they succeed, the first thought that people have, and you can understand this, is to sell if somebody bigger comes along. So we have very few businesses that are listed on the stock exchange or on the AIM. And to grow beyond to the point perhaps of being listed, that's not in the minds of lots of businesses. Do we still have that mindset, do you think? Do we still have a problem with people starting in business and then having established a successful SME, then going on to build something bigger? Yeah,
I think in some instances, yes. From my experience of the businesses that we've had success stories, so the likes of sort of the larger companies that have gone through our next level program, which is sort of almost your sprint to scale, if you like. A lot of owners are looking at the legacy that they leave for their children, for example. I think one thing that we sort of have experienced as well is that whole sense of business, family and community in our entrepreneurship culture that we've got here in the NatWest Hub. I agree, I think in the ecosystem there are smaller businesses that are looking to almost exit for that financial gain, absolutely. But from my experience, I think that's actually becoming less of a less of a barrier.
Okay, so do you think that the cultural barriers are coming down, or are they still there more in Wales than they were in terms of seeing business, for example, as a way forward in terms of someone's career?
I think basically what we've got here is a phenomenal percentage of small businesses. We've got something like, is it 97%, I think, of our ecosystem's made up of small businesses. I think people underestimate that they're actually an entrepreneur. In fact, they're just running a business. I think they're almost sort of working in the business rather than on the business is the tendency that we see, which is, again, the reason why we are in existence, in effect, is because actually we are there to take people out of the business. They can focus on the skills that they need and tool up in order to take that business further. There's so many people who, I think, take their own self-worth for granted in terms of business, if I'm honest. So one of my key passions, for example, is looking at how we, the accessibility of the NatWest Hub to rural areas and to areas sort of my community, for example. So I'm obviously, I live and I've grown up in Blackwood in South Wales, where I'm surrounded by man-made, if you like, or self-made rather, entrepreneurs who don't actually understand the value that they are now pumping into their local communities. And that for me is phenomenal, because actually it's a circular economy. And how we get more of that is quite possibly one of my key objectives to highlight for 2020. I want people to really appreciate what they're doing for their local communities, because they are, if you like, changing lives. So from the likes of a gym to a local bakery to a small boutique clothing company, it's all making a difference. But I think sometimes people don't understand actually the value that they are, or their own value, if you like, in the world of business.
Strong words and very powerful words. Let's look at the future. If I was to ask you the question, what would you like Wales to look like in terms of the business community over the course of the next decade? What do you think we should be doing, and where would you like us to be?
That's a really challenging question, which is obviously my personal view would be that we would be a leader in some sector of some sort. So take tech, the easiest, yeah. So a tech leader in either, whether that's meditech, whether that's fintech. I would love us to be a tech leader on the world map, if that makes sense. I think we've got the beginnings of something very special happening here. We've got the beginning of a phenomenal educational system which is supporting industry through that tech evolution. I think we've got quite a lot of excitement starting to gather in terms of what the future looks like for tech in Wales. And I think with an infusion of that, I suppose, replicated enthusiasm in the investor and the risk capital sort of sector in Wales, I think we could achieve phenomenal things.
I mean, I remember talking to some people last year, and they were saying that they'd been to an event where people were asked to name areas where we were leading the world in Wales. And people come up with different answers. But there are two areas where we lead the world. One's compound semiconductors, and there's insurance. The number of insurance companies we've got.
Which is fintech, effectively.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we've got that sort of... And one of the things I found, if I went abroad, trying to attract investment into Wales, the first question you'd be asked was, well, have you got the skills?
Yeah.
And the second question would be, well, are there others like us who are already operating successfully in Wales? And that was all, we could point to companies and say, look, you've got that company there, they can get the skills, they can create their own pool of talent, and you can do the same thing.
And I think for another thing, which I'd love to see, however, is, yes, obviously the tech piece is very sort of important, and I'd love to see us become that sort of flagship sort of centre of excellence, if you like, for tech. Having said that, I think if you look at our sort of local communities, one may ask, okay, where does that leave our local high street, for example? Where does that leave our smaller communities, and how does that, I suppose, get that prosperity for all message clearly to sort of deep-rooted into these places? So I think there's a way in which we could all, I suppose, contribute towards that sort of high street, better sort of conditions in a community, taking business local, and how we help sort of support that local aspect to that business as well. So one of my key passions, dare I admit it, is obviously supply chain and procurement. How can we make more opportunities become available to smaller businesses so they can really aim for the stars? And I think that's again something that we should really pay attention to in the next few years.
Yeah, a lot of public service contracts are big.
They are.
And so the bigger companies tend to bid for them, construction particularly. And sometimes you have to break down contracts in order to ensure that local companies are able to bid. And so more money can be kept locally. I remember in 2001, 2002, when I was in charge of rural affairs, farmers always complained to me that in France, public contracts were, they ignored the rules, European rules, because anything over €5,000 had to be advertised in the journal. And so we looked at it. In fact, they didn't ignore the rules at all. No. What they did was they'd say, right, this is the school meal contract. And what we'll do is we'll break it down to the potato contract, the onion contract, and they were all under €5,000.
Perfect.
Nothing stopped them doing it. That was all fine. And the other issue was helping smaller businesses to work with others to actually bid for the bigger contracts. And the NHS contract was a fine example of that. We looked at the NHS red meat contract as it was then, and there was no Welsh company who could supply it because no one could supply day in, day out, year in, year out, constantly. They were all too small to do it. Then of course, we got them to do it together, and sure enough,
through a consortium, absolutely.
Yeah. Rather than, because you can't break down a contract like that because you've got to have regularity of supply.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what's next for Siwan Rees?
Good question. I think I will always take with me throughout my career this passion for talent and skills. I think whatever I do next, not where, but whatever I do next, I think will still be something where I suppose people as a core will exist, and how that looks like in terms of next steps, I'm not sure. I'd like to think that it will be making a mark on ensuring that talent finds its place in Wales and stays in Wales. I think that's quite sort of important for me. We've got these phenomenal institutions that are providing phenomenal sort of people to literally at sort of our fingertips. So how do we keep them in Wales? How do we retain and become sort of a leader in terms of knowledge, in terms of business, and in terms of everything else, really?
And make the most of the kids. They grow up really quickly. One of my regrets is when I was, my kids only ever knew me in government, and quite often I'd come back day after day after day and they'd be in bed. I wouldn't see them. Yeah. Especially in the week, and then they get older, and then when you can leave them in the house on their own, that's a really big thing. And when you leave them in the house overnight on their own and find the house still intact when you get back, that's a big step as well.
Well, I've got one. Carwyn's actually going to Llangrannog next week.
Oh, yeah. Good stuff. Yeah.
Oh, if I can remember my trip to Llangrannog as well.
Oh, it's all posh now, Llangrannog.
Absolutely.
It's all been done up, and it's not what it was. Yeah. Yes. No, they do grow up very quickly, and then they're teenagers. That's fun.
Yes.
There we are. Well, Siwan, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. It's been, I think, a huge eye-opener for me. I think you've shown that it is perfectly possible, and I think this is an important point to reiterate, to be a successful mother and have a successful career.
Thank you.
That's, I think, an important message, as I said, to so many young women who are listening, we hope, out there to this podcast. But the best of luck in the future.
Thank you very much.
And we'll follow your career with interest.
Great, thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.